On March 16, 1943, a 46-ship merchant convoy sailed from Nova Scotia heading for Britain. The ships were loaded with tanks, grain, explosives, steel, lumber, everything Britain needed to keep fighting, everything Britain couldn't survive without. The convoy's original route would take it directly through a patch of ocean in the North Atlantic, an ordinary route, a predictable route, the kind of route the German U-boats hunted like wolves. But the convoy never reached those waters. Instead, it was rerouted 200 miles south, away from danger, away from the 25 German submarines waiting in ambush. The convoy arrived in Britain without losing a single ship. The commodore of the convoy, the man in charge, sent a signal back across the Atlantic. All arrived. 3 simple words. But those words represented something extraordinary. They represented the moment when secret messages, coded words whispered in radio signals, encrypted in machines that couldn't be broken, became the deciding factor in World War II. This is the story of how breaking the unbreakable code saved millions of lives, and how one extraordinary group of codebreakers in the middle of rural England saw patterns no one else could see and changed the course of human history. The story starts in the 1920s, long before the war. In Germany, a businessman and inventor named Arthur Scherbius had an idea: encryption, secret codes, the ability to send messages that couldn't be intercepted. He designed a machine, the Enigma. It looked simple: a typewriter on top, rotors inside that spun and scrambled letters, a plug board that rearranged connections. Press the letter R, and depending on the rotor positions, it might come out as K or X or M. Every time you pressed a key, the rotors spun, changing the substitution for the next letter. The Germans saw the potential immediately. This machine could protect military secrets. In the late 1920s, they began using Enigma for their radio communications. By 1939, when the war started, the Enigma machine was the foundation of German military encryption. And here's the critical thing: the Germans believed it was unbreakable. They had done the math. They knew how many possible settings the rotors could make. 150 million combinations. Changed daily. And the basic principle was sound letter substitution had been the backbone of cryptography for centuries. If you wanted to crack an Enigma message, you'd need to try billions of combinations. It should have taken years, decades even, but the Germans didn't know about the Poles. In the 1930s, while Germany was building Enigma machines, a group of Polish mathematicians was studying them. The Poles had access to a captured Enigma machine. They had access to documents stolen by a French spy named Hans Thilo Schmidt. And they had something else: mathematical genius. 3 mathematicians in particular, Marian Rejewski, Henryk Zygalski, and Jerzy Rojewski, began to see patterns. They developed mathematical techniques to break Enigma. By December 1932, Rejewski had cracked the basic system using pure mathematical theory. Then they built a machine to automate the process. They called it the bomb. The name came from the Polish mathematician who had worked on Cipher machines before them, Bomba. The Polish bombs could test Enigma settings mechanically, checking thousands of combinations instead of doing it by hand. By 1938, Poland was regularly reading German military messages, German communications, secret orders, military movements, everything encrypted by Enigma, all of it broken. But Poland was about to be invaded. In July 1939, 3 weeks before Hitler invaded, the Polish Cipher Bureau made a decision. They invited the British and French intelligence services to a secret meeting south of Warsaw. At that meeting, they revealed everything: the techniques, the mathematical breakthroughs, the bomb machine. They even gave the British and French a complete Enigma machine to study. Then Poland fell. The Polish cryptographers scattered. Some escaped to France, some made it to Britain, but their work, their extraordinary intellectual achievement, lived on. The British took the Polish techniques and the Polish bomb machine concept and ran with it, but they needed more. They needed to build bigger, faster, better machines, and they needed a place to do it. That place was Bletchley Park. Bletchley Park sat 50 miles northwest of London in Buckinghamshire. It was nondescript, an old Victorian country house and 58 acres of grounds, nothing special, nothing that suggested it would become the most important intelligence operation of the war. But it was perfect. It had a railway connection to both Oxford and Cambridge universities, close enough to London to stay connected, far enough away to maintain secrecy. The property could be expanded with new buildings huts, the workers called them, without drawing attention. In August 1939, as war loomed, the government code and Cipher school, Britain's official code-breaking organization, moved in. But they needed people, brilliant people, mathematicians, chess players, linguists, puzzle solvers, men and women who could see patterns where others saw gibberish. The director was a man named Alastair Denniston, who had been a codebreaker in the First World War. He knew what he was looking for. He put out calls to Oxford and Cambridge universities. Cambridge sent 24 academics. Oxford sent 13. Mathematicians mostly, brilliant minds. One of those academics was a 26-year-old mathematician from Cambridge named Alan Turing. He had already done groundbreaking work on mathematical logic. In 1936, he had written a paper about computable numbers, essentially inventing the theoretical foundation for the modern computer. He had won a fellowship at King's College at age 22. Now he was about to apply his genius to breaking Enigma. Turing wasn't what anyone expected. He was shabby, disheveled. He wore an old tie to hold up his pants and rarely shaved. He had a prominent stutter. His colleagues remembered him as awkward, strange, brilliant in a way that made normal people uncomfortable. But when it came to mathematics, Turing could see into the machine's logic the way most people couldn't. Working with the Polish techniques as a starting point, Turing and his colleagues Gordon Welchman, Hugh Alexander, and others began to design a new, more powerful bomb machine. The bombe was 6 feet by 8 feet. 30 rotating drums that spun through thousands of letter possibilities. It was essentially 30 Enigma machines wired together, testing combinations automatically. What would have taken a human mathematician days to calculate, the bombe could test in hours. But here's the thing that people often don't understand. The bombe didn't magically break Enigma on its own. It was faster than human calculation, yes, but it still needed guidance. It needed something called a crib. A crib was a guess about what the plain text message said. If code breakers could reasonably guess that a message started with a common phrase like "good morning" or "top secret" or the name of a weather station, they could use that assumption to narrow down the possible rotor settings the bombe should test. The German military helped them immensely. German officers were arrogant about their code. They were careless with their procedures. They used Enigma for trivial communications. Hermann Göring, the commander of the Luftwaffe, used it to send messages confirming that pilots he was about to decorate had been properly deloused. The code breakers learned German military procedures. They learned what kinds of messages German units sent and when. They studied captured documents. Slowly, pattern by pattern, they built a picture of the enemy's procedures that allowed them to make educated guesses. By the autumn of 1940, the first bombe machine was installed at Bletchley Park. It was slow, it broke down constantly. The RAF personnel who maintained the machines had to work through a labyrinth of cables and gears to fix them. 1 in 8 machines would fail on any given shift. But it worked. In May 1940, using a brilliant insight by a young codebreaker named John Herivel about how German operators set their machines, Turing and his team broke the German Luftwaffe's main cipher, which they called Red. They could read the Germans' Air Force communications. This should have been immediately useful. The British were defending against German air attacks in preparation for invasion. Real-time knowledge of German air operations could have saved thousands of lives, but there was a problem. The problem was nobody knew how to use this intelligence. When Bletchley Park's first successes came in May 1940, the British military command didn't trust the intelligence. They didn't understand where it was coming from. They thought it was a trick, a German deception operation. They ignored it. The Germans invaded France. The British Expeditionary Force was evacuated at Dunkirk. Thousands died when the intelligence could have warned them. The military leadership simply didn't believe that messages from the enemy's mouth intercepts from their own radio networks, decoded and presented directly from the machines, could be reliable. It was too good to be true. It had to be a trap. But Winston Churchill understood. The Prime Minister had toured Bletchley Park early in 1941. He saw the operation. He understood the potential. He issued an order. The code breakers would be given whatever resources they needed. Their intelligence would receive the highest classification, Achra, and would be protected above all else. The key to making Yaltra work was operational security. If the Germans discovered their codes were broken, they would change them. The entire system would collapse. So intelligence officers had to be incredibly careful. When Bletchley Park provided information about enemy movements, the Allies had to use it in ways that didn't reveal how they knew. If they knew a German ship was at a certain location, they couldn't send bombers straight to it. That would be suspicious. Instead, they would send a reconnaissance aircraft first, as if they had discovered the ship by accident. Then they would attack. The Germans assumed they had been spotted by chance. The first major breakthrough came in the Battle of Cape Matapan in March 1941, when British naval forces defeated Italian ships using Ultra intelligence from broken Italian naval Enigma codes. The British claimed they had spotted the enemy ships visually. The Italians had no idea they had been defeated because the British were reading their messages. But the real test was coming. The battle that would define the entire war, the battle for the Atlantic. Britain depended on supplies from America, food, weapons, ammunition, oil. Everything came across the Atlantic in merchant convoys. Without those supplies, Britain would starve. Britain would lose. Adolf Hitler knew this. He had ordered Admiral Karl Dönitz to strangle Britain with U-boats, submarines prowling the Atlantic, sinking merchant ships faster than the Allies could replace them. Dönitz developed a tactic he called the Wolf Pack. Instead of operating alone, U-boats would coordinate. One boat would find a convoy and radio its position to others. The U-boats would converge. They would attack at night when their silhouettes wouldn't be visible. The convoy would be slaughtered. In 1941, before the Allies could read naval Enigma, the wolf packs were devastating. German submarines were sinking 282,000 tons of merchant shipping per month. At that rate, Britain's supply lifeline would be severed in months. Britain was losing the war, and the German Navy was winning it without Germany even knowing the Allies were reading their messages. Then, on May 9, 1941, something extraordinary happened. A British destroyer named HMS Bulldog attacked a German U-boat designated U-110. The U-boat was damaged and began to sink. But before she went down, a British boarding party managed to get inside and retrieve something extraordinary, the Enigma machine itself, along with all the rotor settings and cipher keys. It was like recovering the keys to a locked vault. The Allies now had a complete German naval Enigma machine, and the documents showing how to use it. Within weeks, Bletchley Park had broken the German naval codes. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Bletchley Park now knew where the wolf packs were positioned. They could read the orders coming from Admiral Dönitz to his submarines. They could see the patrol lines in real time, and they could route convoys around them. A convoy officer would get new orders. Change course 15 degrees south. No explanation. But hidden in that order was intelligence from a decoded German message telling them exactly where German submarines were lurking. The results were staggering. Between July and November 1941, shipping losses dropped from 282,000 tons per month to 120,000 tons per month, then lower. The wolf packs were hunting in patterns that had become useless because the Allies were routing convoys around their positions. Dönitz was baffled. He knew something was wrong. His wolf packs were reporting seeing nothing. The convoys seemed to be appearing out of thin air on different routes. He suspected the Allies were reading his mail. He ordered an investigation. The investigation came back with a clear conclusion. Enigma was unbreakable. The mathematics didn't allow it. Something else must be happening. Journalists never discovered the truth. But the Germans did something that nearly broke the entire operation. In January 1942, the German Navy added a fourth rotor to their Enigma machines. It was called Shark by the Allies. This change multiplied the number of possible settings by 26. Suddenly, instead of being able to break Enigma daily, Bletchley Park couldn't break it at all. For months, the code breakers worked desperately. The bombs ran constantly, testing millions of combinations. The men and women at Bletchley Park worked in shifts, living in a kind of organized chaos, fighting exhaustion to solve a problem that seemed unsolvable. The German U-boats returned to the offensive. Shipping losses climbed back up. The wolf packs were killing merchants again. But then, in December 1942, it happened. The code breakers broke Shark. The exact details of how remain somewhat classified even today, but it involved a combination of mathematical brilliance, lucky captures of additional Enigma keys from a damaged U-boat, and pure persistence. The convoy started being rerouted again. The wolf pack that had killed so many ships suddenly found themselves attacking empty ocean. Convoys disappeared. They would position themselves in patrol lines and wait. Nothing came. The Allies routed shipments around them. U-boat losses climbed. Morale collapsed. By May 1943, Dranitz was losing U-boats faster than he could replace them. He pulled the wolf packs out of the North Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. The Allies had won. The supply lines remained open. America could continue supplying Britain, and Enigma had made the difference. But Enigma wasn't the only German code that needed breaking. There was another system, more complex, more heavily encrypted. The Germans called it Lorenz. The Allies called it Tunny. While the bomb machines were breaking Enigma, a different team at Bletchley Park was attacking Lorenz. It was more complicated than Enigma. It used 12 rotors instead of 3. The number of possible settings made Enigma look simple. The challenge was so great that the engineers at Bletchley Park realized they needed something new, something faster than the mechanical bombs, something that could process information at electronic speeds instead of mechanical speeds. In 1943, Tommy Flowers, an engineer from the Post Office Research Station, designed something revolutionary, Colossus. It was the world's first programmable electronic computer. It had 1,600 vacuum tubes. It could test cipher settings thousands of times faster than any mechanical machine. Colossus became operational in January 1944, just in time for D-Day. It cracked Lorenz messages in minutes instead of days. The intelligence from broken Lorenz messages intercepted communications between Hitler and his generals, would inform Allied strategy for the rest of the war. But here's what's remarkable. Most of this remained secret for 30 years. When the war ended in 1945, all information about Bletchley Park was classified. The code breakers went back to their lives. Some became academics. Some joined the early computing industry, having designed the world's first computers. They knew where the future was going. Alan Turing returned to academic research in mathematics and logic. He published a groundbreaking paper on artificial intelligence. He was awarded the Order of the British Empire for his war work, though few people knew what that work actually was. The official secrets remained locked away under the Official Secrets Act. It wasn't until 1974, nearly 30 years after the war ended, that the British government began declassifying Bletchley Park documents. When the story finally became public, it shocked the world. Historians who had spent 30 years studying World War II suddenly had to rewrite their understanding of how the war was won. How much did Enigma actually matter? Historians have studied this question extensively, and the answer is staggering. Intelligence historians suggest that breaking Enigma shortened the war by as much as 2 years. Some estimates say the code-breaking effort prevented the deaths of up to 14 million people. Think about what that means. Every person alive today who wouldn't have been born if World War II had lasted 2 years longer. Entire generations. Entire families that owe their existence to code breakers working in huts in Buckinghamshire. But the strategic impacts were concrete and measurable. In the Atlantic, the Allies saved millions of tons of shipping because they could route convoys around U-boats. Food reached Britain. Supplies reached front lines. America's industrial capacity flowed to Allied armies. Before D-Day in 1944, Eisenhower's commanders knew German dispositions because of UL terror intelligence. They knew where German tanks were positioned. They knew German reinforcement plans. When German generals sent messages discussing their troop movements, the Allies read them first. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 was Hitler's last major offensive. The Germans achieved surprise partly because Hitler ordered a radio silence no encrypted messages that could be intercepted. For once, the Allies were blind. The offensive nearly succeeded, but by then, the war was nearly won. The code breakers had given the Allies such an advantage in intelligence that even with the occasional temporary loss of information, the overall trajectory was clear. Germany would lose. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. Japan surrendered in August after atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But the story didn't end there. It transformed. After the war, Bletchley Park was returned to civilian use. The wooden huts were eventually torn down. The site became a school, then an office park. Most of the buildings that housed the greatest code-breaking operation in history were demolished. It wasn't until 2007 that the National Museum of Computing was established to preserve Bletchley's legacy. The Colossus computer, the world's first programmable electronic computer, had its blueprints destroyed after the war for security reasons. Scientists had to reconstruct it from scratch. A rebuilt Colossus machine now sits in the museum, a testament to the ingenuity of people whose names most of the world has never heard. Alan Turing went on to become one of the founding figures of artificial intelligence and theoretical computer science. His paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, published in 1950, essentially asked, "Can machines think?" It became the foundation for decades of research into artificial intelligence. But Turing's story took a tragic turn. In 1952, he was prosecuted for homosexuality, which was illegal in Britain. Rather than accept harsh punishment, he chose chemical castration as an alternative. In 1954, he died from cyanide poisoning, officially ruled a suicide. It wasn't until 2013 that Turing received a posthumous pardon from the British Crown. Too late for him, but recognition that one of history's greatest minds had been tragically mistreated. The other code breakers faced better fates, though most remained silent about their wartime work for decades. They signed the Official Secrets Act and kept the secret even from their own families. One of them, Joan Clark, was a brilliant cryptanalyst who worked on naval Enigma. For years, her contribution was barely known. She died in 1996 before the full story of her work could be properly told. The story of breaking the Enigma code isn't just a story about mathematics or code breaking or intelligence operations. It's a story about how invisible work that nobody could know was happening changed the course of human history. The people working at Bletchley Park couldn't tell anyone what they did. Not their families, not their friends. After the war, most of them carried the secret for decades. Some took it to their graves, but their work shaped the world we live in. The broken code shortened the war and saved millions of lives. The computers they built, Colossus, were the foundation for the digital revolution that followed. The mathematical techniques they developed are still used in cryptography today. Most remarkably, the code breakers achieved something that seemed mathematically impossible. The Germans had built a machine they believed was unbreakable. The code breakers proved them wrong. They saw patterns, they thought mathematically, they persisted through impossible problems, and they changed everything. The next time you send a secure message on your phone, encrypted, scrambled, protected from prying eyes, remember that you're using technology that traces its roots back to those huts in Bletchley Park. You're using mathematics developed by code breakers who couldn't speak of their work. The unbreakable code was broken, and the world was changed forever.